Empty her bag, now!" The officer's voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through the sterile hum of the checkpoint. A public spectacle for this quiet elderly woman stripped of her privacy before a watchful crowd. They expected secrets, contraband, anything to confirm their prejudice. But as her worn duffel spilled its contents, a single, meticulously folded military uniform emerged. A moment that silenced the room, froze the officers in their tracks. They thought she was nothing. They were devastatingly wrong. What incredible legacy, what forgotten valor lay hidden within her unassuming life? Veteranbiker presents this powerful true story. From where in the world are you watching today? Join us, hit like, and subscribe. The fluorescent glare of the government building lobby hung heavy in the air, a sterile drone barely masking the constant cacophony of hurried voices and the insistent metallic beep of security scanners. Rain lashed against the tall, unforgiving windows, casting the already tense atmosphere in a dull grey pallor that seeped into every corner of the vast atrium. The air, thick with the unsaid anxieties of travel and bureaucracy, felt compressed, almost suffocating. Lines of weary individuals snaked through the space, their faces a canvas of impatience, resignation, or the vacant glow of phone screens. Each person was a fleeting detail in the grand impersonal machinery of the day. Amidst this restless throng, Elara, a woman whose silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a meticulous bun, stood with an almost unsettling stillness. Her plain, immaculate clothing, a simple wool coat, sensible shoes, seemed to defy the slouching impatience and phone-staring distractions of those around her. Unlike the others who shifted their weight or sighed audibly, she remained utterly motionless, a quiet island in a sea of agitated humanity. Her eyes, a deep knowing grey, remained fixed forward, betraying nothing, her hands clasped calmly before her, waiting. She had waited before, in different places, for different reasons, but always with this same quiet resolve. The ceaseless drumming of the rain against the glass, a rhythmic counterpoint to the checkpoint's buzzing efficiency, seemed to be the only thing she truly acknowledged, a faint, distant echo in her mind. Officer Garrett, a man whose too-tight uniform strained across his broad frame and whose perpetual frown seemed etched onto his face, scanned the line with a practiced, almost predatory suspicion. His gaze, sharp and dismissive, snagged on Elara. He held it a moment longer than necessary, his eyes narrowing slightly, an inexplicable irritation surfacing as he observed her unwavering composure. He preferred the fidgeters, the nervous glances, the obvious signs of impatience. They were predictable. This woman, with her quiet dignity, was an anomaly he instinctively distrusted. Without a word, he snapped a beckoning gesture, a sharp, almost aggressive motion of his hand. Elara responded instantly, her movements fluid and precise, as if every sinew in her body had been trained for immediate compliance. She moved forward, her steps silent on the polished floor, stopping exactly where indicated. "ID," Officer Garrett barked, his palm outstretched, not meeting her gaze. His voice was rough, accustomed to eliciting immediate obedience. Elara reached into her simple, worn leather purse. Her fingers, though slender, moved with an economical precision honed by years, perhaps decades, of handling important documents. She produced an identification card and placed it carefully into his outstretched hand. The lamination around the edges was yellowed, the photos slightly faded, a testament to its age. Officer Garrett turned the card over, his frown deepening into a scowl. He held it up to the fluorescent light, scrutinizing it. "This is expired," he stated flatly, his voice carrying an edge of triumph, as if he had just uncovered a major infraction. His eyes, for the first time, met Elara's, cold, calculating, and laced with judgment. A fleeting, almost painful whisper from the past flickered in Elara's deep grey eyes. In the mirror of Garrett's cold gaze, a vivid memory flashed, a younger Elara, vibrant and resolute, standing ramrod straight in a crisp military uniform, receiving a brand new version of that very card. Her face, in that memory, was alight with purpose, with the fierce, quiet resolve of a woman embarking on a life of profound significance. The sun then had streamed through a high window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the dreary light of this modern lobby. She remembered the weight of the card in her hand, the solemnity of the moment, the words of commendation from a superior officer whose face was now a blur. The memory vanished, quick as a breath, leaving only a faint, melancholic echo behind her unwavering composure, a quiet ache in a place she rarely visited. The appointment letter said it would be acceptable, Elara replied, her voice soft but clear, perfectly steady despite the accusation in his tone. There was no tremor, no defensiveness, only a simple statement of fact. She reached into her bag again, her movements unhurried, and produced an official-looking letter. It bore a government seal, crisp and impressive, suggesting a high level of authority. Garrett barely glanced at the letter. His eyes, still narrowed, flickered over the seal. Then he contemptuously handed it back to her. His focus wasn't on the details, it was on the anomaly standing before him, the woman who didn't fit his preconceived notions of a difficult traveler. He wanted to assert control, to break her composure. "Purpose of your visit today," he pressed, his voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby travelers. The casual chatter in the line seemed to dim slightly as heads began to turn. Elara hesitated. Her gaze remained fixed forward, not meeting his challenging stare. "It is personal," she answered simply, her voice still soft, but with an underlying firmness that suggested the matter was closed. Her vagueness only heightened Garrett's suspicion. As other travelers, younger, louder, more fashionably dressed, were waved through with cursory checks, a subtle injustice permeated the air. Their faces, momentarily diverted from their phones, now watched Isolde with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Garrett's focus on Elara intensified, becoming almost obsessive. He was like a predator sensing a weakness, even if he couldn't quite articulate what it was. The more composed she remained, the more agitated he became, his need to uncover something, anything, growing with each passing second. He called over his colleague, Officer Hayes, a stockier man with salt and pepper hair and a nameplate reading Hayes, who had been observing the prolonged interaction with a casual disinterest that now shifted to mild curiosity. "Officer Hayes, can you assist with a secondary screening?" Hayes approached, eyeing Elara with the same unearned suspicion that Garrett radiated. There was a silent professional understanding between them, a shared belief in their own authority and an unspoken disdain for anything that disrupted their routine. "Step aside, ma'am," Hayes ordered, his voice gruff, his expression unyielding. Elara complied immediately, her posture shifting subtly, automatically, into what almost resembled a position of attention. Her back straightened imperceptibly, her shoulders squared, and when she responded with an automatic, "Yes, sir," Officer Garrett's eyebrows raised slightly. It was a reaction he hadn't expected, a precision, a formality that seemed out of place for an ordinary civilian. It piqued his interest, stirring a nascent, unwelcome thought that there might be more to this woman than met the eye. But he quickly dismissed it, attributing it to eccentric old age or perhaps a history in some obscure non-military civil service. He still believed he had the upper hand, that he was dealing with an eccentric, not a threat. The rain continued its steady drum against the windows, a soundtrack to the rising tension. That bag, Officer Garrett pointed with a sharp, almost aggressive motion to her worn duffel, which rested beside the small rolling suitcase she carried. His voice was a command, an unequivocal directive designed to assert dominance. "Open it!" Elara's gaze remained steady, fixed on some unseen point just beyond the officers. Her hands, previously clasped, now unclasped, and hung loosely at her sides. "May I request a private screening?" she asked quietly, her voice still soft, but with an underlying current of unwavering resolve. Her request was a statement, not a plea, delivered with a calm dignity that seemed utterly out of place in the bustling, impersonal security line. Officer Garrett exchanged a swift, knowing glance with Hayes. A brief, almost imperceptible smirk flickered on Garrett's lips, a silent agreement that her request was a sign of guilt, not a desire for privacy. This was exactly the kind of resistance he relished. "No," Garrett stated, his voice harder now, cutting through the low murmur of the gathering crowd. "Open it here. We can do this here, or we can take you to a room where the questions get a lot more thorough. Your choice." His words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat designed to intimidate, to break her composure. He watched her closely, anticipating a flicker of fear, a tremor of hesitation. Rain still dripped from Elara's wool coat as she stood before them, a solitary figure under the harsh fluorescent lights of the checkpoint. Her dignity remained intact, a shield against their thinly veiled aggression, but a subtle tension around her jaw hinted that her patience, though vast, was indeed wearing thin. The fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows across her face, emphasizing the fine lines etched by age and experience. The small crowd of onlookers, initially drawn by the raised voices, had swelled, now nearing 24 people. Their morning coffee forgotten in their hands, phones discreetly appearing to record the unfolding spectacle, they sensed the brewing confrontation, an unexpected drama breaking the monotony of their bureaucratic morning. "Is there a problem?" Elara asked, her voice betraying nothing of the challenge in Garrett's tone, a calm pool in the rising tide of tension. "That depends on what you have in the bag," Garrett replied, his voice laced with mock casualness, yet his eyes remained sharp, scrutinizing her every subtle movement. A group of young office workers had stopped dead in their tracks to watch, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and vague discomfort. One woman, her brow furrowed in a quiet frown, seemed troubled by the scrutiny being given to the older woman, but she said nothing, her unease unspoken. The rain continued its steady drum against the windows, a relentless percussive soundtrack to the escalating tension, mimicking a distant, muffled heartbeat. Elara's gaze swept across the faces of the onlookers, a brief, assessing glance that seemed to take in every detail of their discomfort and curiosity. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion that conveyed both compliance and an unyielding will, she set the duffel on the cold metal table. Her fingers, steady and precise, reached for the zipper. She unzipped it partway, just enough to show that it was unzipped. "I would prefer privacy," she repeated, her voice a low murmur, a final, quiet plea for a respect that was clearly being denied. "And I would prefer compliance," Officer Garrett snapped back, his voice harder now, impatient with her quiet resistance. He wanted this over, on his terms. He wanted to assert absolute control. "We can do this here, or we can take you to a room where the questions get a lot more thorough. Your choice." His words were a gauntlet thrown down, a final test of wills. Something flickered in Elara's deep grey eyes, not fear, not anger, but a profound calculation, an assessment of the situation. It was the look of someone who had made countless difficult decisions before, decisions with far greater consequences than this public ordeal. It was the look of a strategist, weighing options, choosing the path of least resistance not out of weakness, but out of strategic necessity. She knew when to push and when to yield, a lesson learned in arenas far more perilous than this. "Very well," she said at last, stepping back from the table, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her posture that conveyed a quiet defiance even in concession. She conceded the battle for privacy, but not for dignity. Officer Garrett, sensing his victory, snapped on a pair of latex gloves with a theatrical flourish. The sharp, almost violent snap echoed disproportionately loud through the checkpoint, a deliberate performance designed to intimidate both Elara and the growing crowd. It startled several people, causing a palpable ripple of unease. For a fraction of a second, Elara flinched, a flash of primal memory in her eyes, the grinding metallic shriek of a heavy door slamming shut, or the cold click of a lock turning in a place long buried deep within her past. Then her expression returned to neutral, her dignity intact, but her patience visibly wearing thin. "Since you are being difficult," Garrett announced loudly, his voice tinged with smug satisfaction, "we will do this ourselves." The crowd grew, their phones appearing more openly now, capturing the spectacle. Elara's expression remained neutral, a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper, not fear, but a profound resignation. She had been here before in different ways, in different places. The public humiliation, the invasive scrutiny, the forced compliance, these were echoes of trials long past. "What is so important in this bag that you need privacy?" Loretz asked, his voice laced with thinly veiled curiosity, already unzipping the main compartment without waiting for an answer. Their hands plunged into her belongings, rummaging through them without ceremony. They began removing her possessions one by one, displaying them on the cold metal table. A prescription bottle of pills, its label facing outward for all to see. A carefully wrapped framed photograph, which they did not unwrap, but handled with a casual indifference that hinted at their disregard for its sentimental value. A dog-eared copy of Tennyson's poems, its pages worn thin by countless readings. Each item was extracted with less care than the last, tossed onto the table with an almost dismissive flick of the wrist. A young office worker, leaning in closer, whispered to his colleague, "This feels wrong." His friend nodded, but kept watching, unable to look away from the quiet humiliation unfolding before them. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable silence punctuated only by the rustle of fabric and the occasional clink of items on the metal table. "What is this?" Garrett held up a small, unusual key. It was ornate and clearly old, its brass tarnished with the patina of decades. He turned it over in his gloved fingers, examining it with a frown of suspicion. "It opened something that should have stayed closed," Elara replied, her voice steady but distant, as if the words themselves carried a secret weight, a burden from a distant past. The officers exchanged a look, then laughed. "Very mysterious," Garrett mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Old spy movie fan, are we?" His tone was dismissive, yet a flicker of genuine curiosity, quickly suppressed, crossed his face. He tossed the key back onto the table, where it landed with a quiet clink amidst Elara's other scattered belongings. The search continued, relentless and invasive. As officers Garrett and Hayes continued their relentless search, more personal items emerged, each revelation a further invasion of Elara's dwindling privacy. Things that should remain private, guarded secrets of a life lived, were now laid bare under the harsh, unfeeling glare of the fluorescent lights. A neatly folded silk scarf, smelling faintly of lavender and old paper, was pulled out and tossed aside. Then a small leather-bound address book, its pages filled with elegant faded script. Garrett thumbed through it, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. "Planning to visit friends while you're in town?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Some of these addresses are overseas." Elara's eyes, fixed forward, seemed to glaze over momentarily. "Most of those people are dead now," she replied quietly, her voice devoid of emotion, yet something in her tone, a profound, unadorned statement of loss, made even Garrett pause, though only for a fleeting moment. The weight of her words, heavy with unspoken history, seemed to settle for a brief instant on the shoulders of the watching crowd. Next, a handwritten letter, its paper brittle with age, was extracted. Garrett held it up, partially unfolded, allowing the first few lines of intimate script to be visible to anyone peering over the barrier. He didn't read it aloud, but his expression clearly conveyed a sense of distaste, a judgment of the personal thoughts laid bare. Elara remained silent, her gaze unwavering, as if she had weathered far worse storms than this public humiliation. Then came a medical document, its stark white surface contrasting with the worn fabric of her other belongings. Test results with medical terms clearly visible were displayed for all to see, a stark violation of her most intimate information. Loretz, who had been observing with a growing, unsettling curiosity, picked up a small, worn notebook that had fallen from a side pocket. He flipped through its pages, his finger tracing a line. "Drazenvial Operation 1976, he read aloud, mangling the pronunciation slightly, his voice tinged with mocking amusement. "What is that? Your bridge club?" He looked up, expecting a reaction, a flicker of embarrassment or defensiveness. Elara remained silent, her eyes fixed forward, a testament to her profound composure. She absorbed the public dissection of her life with a stillness that was almost unnatural, as if her spirit had long ago learned to detach itself from the superficial assaults of the world. "These old people and their secrets," Garrett said loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear, his voice filled with a dismissive contempt, "always think they are more important than they are." Elara's unwavering silence seemed to irritate him further, fueling his need to uncover something, anything that would justify his suspicions and break her enigmatic calm. He wanted to see a crack, a sign of weakness. He dug deeper into the bag, his movements becoming more aggressive, pulling out items with unnecessary force. His hand brushed against something small, hard, at the very bottom. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box, no larger than his palm. It was old, polished smooth by countless touches. "And what is this?" he asked, opening it without permission, a blatant disregard for personal property. Inside was a small metal pin, unmarked by any recognizable insignia, but clearly military in design. It was a simple design, yet conveyed a sense of quiet authority and solemnity. "A memento?" Garrett asked, his tone mocking. "Of what?" "Of people who are gone now," Elara answered simply, her voice carrying a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a fleeting glimpse into a well of profound loss she rarely revealed. Officer Garrett rolled his eyes, a dismissive gesture. He tossed the box back onto the table, not bothering to close it, his indifference a deliberate act of disrespect. The pin, dislodged by the impact, slid out, clattering against the cold metal surface of the table. Elara's deep grey eyes, which had maintained an almost unnerving stillness throughout the ordeal, followed the pin's trajectory. This was the first real reaction she had shown, a subtle yet profound shift in her composed demeanor. Her gaze, usually fixed forward, now fixated on the small, unassuming piece of metal. "Careful with that, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet infused with an unmistakable urgency, a rare plea that carried the weight of something irreplaceable. "Oh, is it valuable?" Garrett asked with mock concern, a sneer playing on his lips, misinterpreting her plea as a concern for monetary worth. "Maybe we should have it appraised." "Not in money," Elara replied, her voice regaining its steady, distant quality, the brief flicker of emotion receding back into her carefully constructed composure. The final compartment of the duffel remained, a small zippered pocket along the side, seemingly insignificant, yet it held the key to the deepest secret she carried. Garrett reached for the zipper with exaggerated slowness, playing to his captive audience. The crowd had grown to nearly 20 people now, all watching the drama unfold, their initial discomfort giving way to a morbid fascination. "Let us see what other ancient treasures we have in here," he said, tugging the zipper with a deliberate, drawn-out motion. The sound was a harsh rasp, amplified in the tense silence of the checkpoint. A woman in line, no longer able to simply watch, stepped forward. Her brow was furrowed with a mix of frustration and indignation. "Excuse me, officer, but is this really necessary?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "You have already checked everything else. This feels excessive." Garrett glared at her, his authority challenged. "Security protocol, ma'am. Please step back and allow us to do our job." His tone was sharp, a clear warning. Elara gave the woman a small, almost imperceptible nod of appreciation, a fleeting acknowledgement of the kindness shown, but her face remained composed, almost resigned. Whatever was in that final compartment, she had already accepted its discovery. Her battle for privacy was over. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like distant artillery fire, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to echo the beating of a hidden drum, a call to a past that was about to break through. For a moment, Elara seemed to be listening to it rather than paying attention to the search, her mind elsewhere, in another time, another place where rain had fallen just as heavily, perhaps marking moments of far greater consequence. Officer Hayes, meanwhile, spoke into his radio, his voice low and professional. "ID check on the subject. System shows a Thorne, Elara M, but the file is restricted. Possible government employee." The response from the radio crackled back, indistinct but confirming the restriction. Hayes's eyes narrowed. The vague replies, the outdated ID, and now a restricted file. It all painted a picture of someone deliberately hiding something. He looked at Elara, a fresh wave of suspicion washing over his face. While they waited for a more definitive response, Garrett continued his examination of her belongings, his impatience growing. His attention lingered on the address book he had dismissed earlier. "Planning to visit friends while you were in town?" he repeated, his voice laced with renewed sarcasm. "Some of these addresses are overseas," Elara replied quietly. "Most of those people are dead now." Something in her tone, a profound, unadorned statement of loss, made even Garrett pause, though only for a fleeting moment. It was a stark reminder of the passage of time and the human cost of a life that spanned decades. The radio crackled again, more clearly this time. "ID verification inconclusive," came the response. "System shows a Thorne, Elara M, but the file is restricted. Possible government employee. Department unknown. Access level classified." Garrett's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "Government employee? What department?" he demanded, looking at Elara. "I am retired," she said simply. "From what position?" Hayes pressed, his voice sharper now. "That is classified," she replied, the words automatic, as if she had said them countless times before, a mantra of absolute secrecy. Garrett laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "Classified, right, and I'm the president." The crowd had grown restless, some muttering about the treatment of the elderly woman, others filming more openly now, sensing a potential viral moment in the making. The security officers seemed to feed off the attention, their movements becoming more performative, their voices louder. "This is taking too long," a businessman complained from the back of the line. "Some of us have actual appointments." "Sir, please wait your turn," Loretz called back. "Security cannot be rushed." Through it all, Elara remained still, watching her possessions being examined and dismissed, a quiet testament to her unwavering composure. Only when Garrett, in his mounting frustration, picked up the framed photograph and began to unwrap it, did Elara speak. Her voice, which had remained so soft and distant, now gained a sudden firm edge, cutting through the low hum of the checkpoint. "Please be careful with that," she said, the words carrying an unmistakable urgency. "It is irreplaceable." Garrett paused, his fingers still on the wrapping. He looked up, a dismissive sneer playing on his lips. "Everything is irreplaceable to someone, ma'am," he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Yet, despite his words, he did place it down with slightly more care than her other belongings. The photograph remained wrapped, but a corner of the paper had come loose from the flimsy tape. From where she stood, Elara could see just a glimpse of the image. A group of people in crisp, dark uniforms standing before a helicopter, their faces obscured by distance and the faded quality of the old print. Her eyes lingered on it for a brief, poignant moment, a flash of something unreadable, perhaps longing, perhaps sorrow, before returning to their forward, unwavering gaze. The memory it held was too sacred, too personal, to be desecrated by their careless hands and cynical eyes. She simply observed, her inner world a fortress. Loretz, whose radio had just crackled with the inconclusive ID verification, spoke up, a note of reluctant admission in his voice. "Nothing suspicious so far, Rustin, just one more compartment." His eyes, though still wary, held a hint of fatigue. The prolonged, fruitless search was wearing on him. "The most suspicious people hide things in plain sight, Hayes," Garrett retorted, his voice sharp, clearly unwilling to admit that the entire search had been unnecessary, that his initial instincts about Elara might have been utterly wrong. His ego demanded vindication, a definitive discovery. He reached for the final zipper compartment of the duffel bag, the one Elara had been most reluctant to have searched in public. His hand closed around the zipper pull with an almost aggressive certainty, ready to expose whatever final damning secret she harbored. The anticipation in the gathering crowd was palpable, a collective leaning forward, eyes fixed on that last small pocket. As his hand closed around the zipper pull, a tall, imposing elderly man in a pristine formal military suit entered the atrium from a side door. He moved with a quiet, undeniable authority, cutting through the usual hustle of the building. His presence was a ripple in the fabric of the controlled chaos, drawing glances. He was accompanied by two younger officers in equally crisp dress uniforms, their posture as rigid and precise as his own. His gaze swept the atrium, then fixed with unsettling intensity on the commotion at Elara's checkpoint, specifically on the uniform in Officer Garrett's hands. Even at a distance, his posture subtly straightened, an almost unconscious but powerful gesture that spoke volumes to anyone familiar with military bearing. Elara, ever watchful, noticed him, but gave no sign of recognition, her eyes returning to Garrett's hand as he prepared to open the bag's final compartment, her fate in this moment sealed. "Last chance," Garrett said with a smirk, his voice low, playing to his audience, both the captive crowd and his silent partner. "Anything you want to tell us before we see what you're hiding?" "I am not hiding anything," Elara replied calmly, her voice still steady, betraying no hint of the storm that was about to break. "I simply value my privacy." "Privacy is a luxury in security situations, ma'am," Hayes chimed in, reciting the words as if from a manual, his tone devoid of real understanding, a bureaucratic response to a deeply human plea. The zipper made a slow, deliberate, grating sound as Garrett pulled it, the rasp echoing in the sudden silence of the government building lobby. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, curiosity overcoming their better instincts. All eyes were fixed on the final compartment, their collective breath held. "Well, well," Garrett said, a note of smug triumph in his voice as he reached inside. "What do we have here?" Garrett pulled out a carefully folded piece of fabric from the final compartment. The material was thick, high quality, and deeply blue in color. It seemed to hold its shape with an innate dignity, even in his careless grip. As he shook it open, almost dismissively, several people in the growing crowd gasped audibly. It was unmistakably a military uniform jacket, preserved with meticulous care, its very presence a silent, powerful testament to a past they could not comprehend. "Playing dress-up, are we?" Garrett asked with a smirk, turning the jacket to examine it, his voice laced with the same old mocking contempt. But his smirk faltered almost immediately as his eyes fell upon the insignia and decorations pinned to the chest and sleeves. Even to his untrained eye, there was something profoundly unusual about them. They weren't the common recognizable symbols seen on Veterans Day parades or in recruitment posters. Lorette stepped closer, his expression shifting rapidly from mockery to confusion, then to an unsettling puzzlement. He leaned in, peering at the array of pins and patches. "These markings," he muttered, his voice barely audible, a note of genuine bewilderment in it. "I have never seen some of these before." The uniform bore patches and pins that seemed oddly mismatched to the casual observer, a bewildering collection of symbols. Some were recognizable military symbols, yes, but alongside them were others that were completely foreign, esoteric, almost archaic in their design. To anyone with even a passing military knowledge, the combination would have been both rare and profoundly significant, hinting at a history far beyond the public record. "Is this some kind of costume?" Garrett asked, his tone still dismissive, but now tinged with undeniable uncertainty. His bluster was slowly deflating, replaced by a growing sense of unease. He looked at Elara, expecting an explanation, a confession of a harmless eccentricity. Elara's deep grey eyes never left the uniform as it dangled from Garrett's careless grip. For the first time since the search began, a profound emotion flickered across her features. It was not anger, nor the resignation she had shown earlier. It was a profound sadness, mixed with something that might have been pride, a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor of remembrance for a life lived, for comrades lost, for sacrifices made in the shadows. "That is not a costume," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried an immutable weight, a certainty that resonated through the tense silence. "Then what is it?" Lorette pressed, his own confusion mounting. "Because these insignia do not make sense together. They are contradictory." "They would if you had the proper clearance," Elara replied, her voice gaining a subtle undertone of steel, a hint of authority that belied her gentle demeanor and current predicament. It was a statement, not an argument, a declaration of truth. Garrett snorted, trying to reclaim his fading authority. "Right. Secret Agent Grandma." He turned the jacket around, displaying it to the gathered crowd like an auctioneer showing off merchandise, his earlier confidence now a desperate attempt to maintain control of the narrative. "Look at this, folks. Apparently, we have a retired spy in our midst." His words were meant to mock, to belittle, to dismiss the bizarre display as a harmless delusion. New climax one. As Garrett held up the uniform, a sudden sharp glint caught his eye, a unique, almost Gothic-looking pin among the clusters of medals. He seized it, his fingers tightening around the ornate metal. "Or perhaps," he sneered, his voice dropping, now laced with a more insidious accusation, "we have something far less innocent. These symbols, are they part of some radical group? Some kind of underground organization?" His gaze hardened, pinning Elara with an unspoken threat. "Tell us, ma'am, what kind of extremist costume is this?" The shift was immediate and chilling. The comfortable amusement in the crowd evaporated, replaced by a collective gasp, then murmurs of genuine alarm. The bright, sterile lobby suddenly felt cold, dangerous. Elara's eyes, previously veiled by resignation, now met Garrett's with a directness that was almost unsettling, a silent, defiant challenge that dared him to cross a line he clearly did not comprehend. The tension became a living entity in the room, thick and suffocating, as all eyes swung between the accusatory officer and the impenetrable woman. Some in the crowd laughed nervously, an uneasy sound that quickly died out, replaced by a growing silence. The casual entertainment had abruptly dissolved into something far more uncomfortable, far more unsettling. Others had grown completely silent, their faces etched with a discomfort that mirrored the sudden chill in the air. The accusation of radical group or extremist costume had stripped away the last vestiges of morbid curiosity, replacing it with genuine alarm. A few had even lowered their phones, their fingers hesitating over the record button, no longer finding amusement in the spectacle now tainted by such a grave, baseless accusation. The sense of a game had vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a potentially serious and unjust situation. "There are medals here," a woman in the crowd said suddenly, her voice cutting through the strained silence, a note of quiet conviction in her tone. Her eyes, sharper than most, had fixed on the metallic adornments on the uniform jacket. "Those look real." Indeed, several medals were pinned to the uniform jacket, their polished metal catching the harsh fluorescent light, glinting with an understated brilliance. They were not the common mass-produced decorations seen in parades or on Veterans Day. These were specialized, obscure, their designs hinting at a history of operations the public rarely, if ever, heard about. Their rarity was palpable, even to an untrained eye. Probably bought at a surplus store, Garrett dismissed her, his voice still attempting to project confidence, but the uncertainty had undeniably crept into it, a slight tremor around the edges of his words. His conviction was faltering, replaced by a desperate need to cling to his initial narrative. He turned back to Elara, his gaze now a mixture of demand and confusion. "Where did you get this?" "It was issued to me," Elara answered simply, her voice still quiet, yet carrying an unshakable truth that made the casual lie in Garrett's voice seem thin and brittle. There was no defiance, no embellishment, just a plain statement of fact that resonated with an undeniable authenticity. Loretz, whose initial suspicion had been mingled with a growing bewilderment, had been studying the jacket more carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. The strange insignia troubled him. They defied his knowledge of military protocol. His eyes scanned the fabric, searching for something, anything familiar. "There's a name tag," he said suddenly, pointing to a faded patch on the breast of the uniform. The fabric around it was worn, almost threadbare, suggesting years of wear and repeated washing. Garrett squinted at it, leaning closer. "Thorne," he read aloud, his voice flat. "Elara M. Thorne." He looked up at Elara, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly, a new wave of something akin to awe, quickly suppressed, washing over his face. "So it's yours, or you had it custom made?" "Check the service number," he instructed Loretz, his voice still challenging, but with an undertone of dawning realization. The possibility that this unassuming woman was who the uniform suggested was beginning to sink in, a terrifying prospect for his ego. Elara suggested, her voice still calm, but with an undertone of steel now, a quiet confidence that was chilling in its certainty. "It should match my identification." Loretz, already moving with a newfound urgency, looked from the jacket to the ID card they had taken earlier, comparing the numbers with a meticulous focus. His expression changed subtly, a slow transformation from confusion to dawning comprehension, then to a palpable shock. His eyes darted between the two pieces of identification, as if disbelieving what he was seeing. "They match," he muttered, his voice barely audible, the words escaping him almost involuntarily. The simple statement hung in the air, a definitive crack in the officer's fortress of assumption. A man in the crowd, older than most of the others, stepped forward for a better look. He had been watching with an intense, quiet interest, his eyes having immediately recognized the unique markings. "Those are not regular military decorations," he said, his voice firm, authoritative. "That patch there." He pointed with a trembling finger to one of the more obscure symbols. "I have only ever seen it in photographs from classified operations in the 70s. Operations that were never officially acknowledged." His words, spoken with the quiet conviction of one who knew, resonated powerfully in the suddenly hushed lobby. Garrett glared at him, his face a mask of furious indignation, his last shred of authority being chipped away. "Sir, please step back and allow us to do our job." His voice was loud, an attempt to regain control. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace and retreated, but the damage was done. Doubt had been irrevocably cast on the officer's initial assumption that Elara was simply a confused elderly woman, or worse, someone playing dress-up with military memorabilia. The crowd, now fully aware of the dramatic shift, watched with bated breath, their curiosity transforming into a profound sense of awe. "How did you come by this uniform?" Loretz asked, his tone now significantly more respectful, the arrogance having completely drained from his voice. He was no longer questioning, he was genuinely seeking an answer. "I earned it," Elara said simply, the two words delivered with a quiet weight. A stark, unadorned truth that needed no further explanation. Garrett, however, was unwilling to concede so easily, his ego clinging to the last vestiges of his initial judgment. He seized on the one piece of official knowledge he thought he had. "Women were not allowed in combat roles during that time period," he said triumphantly, as if catching her in a blatant lie. He puffed out his chest, a desperate attempt to reclaim some shred of his crumbling authority. "Officially," Elara agreed, her voice still soft, but the single word was delivered with an almost chilling precision. Something in the way she said the word, the subtle emphasis and the knowing look in her eyes, made several people in the crowd exchange glances. The implication hung heavy in the air, undeniable and profound. What happened officially and what happened in reality could be very different things, especially in the shadowed, clandestine world of military operations. The revelation was not just about her past, but about the very nature of truth and secrecy. Here is part 6 of the script, continuing directly from part 5 with a minimum of 1,000 words. "So what are you claiming? That you were some kind of secret female soldier?" Officer Garrett's skepticism was still clear, but his mockery had lost its sharp, venomous edge, replaced by a desperate, almost pleading tone. He was fishing for a confession, any explanation that would make sense of the conflicting realities before him, the ordinary elderly woman and the extraordinary uniform. The implications of Elara's single word officially hung heavy in the air, a silent challenge to his preconceived notions of history and gender roles. It suggested a vast hidden world of operations and sacrifices that defied the official narrative he had been taught. "I am not claiming anything," Elara replied, her voice remaining calm, unruffled by his probing. Her gaze remained fixed forward, unwavering. "I am simply here for my appointment." Her refusal to engage, her steadfast adherence to a simple, unadorned truth, seemed to irritate Garrett further, fueling his frustration. He longed for an argument, a denial, anything he could dissect and dismiss. Her quiet dignity was an impenetrable shield. Hayes had been scrolling through something on a tablet, his face a mask of concentration. He was searching military records, trying desperately to find any public database entry for an Elara Thorne. "Nothing is coming up in the public database," he announced, his voice tinged with frustration. The official systems, the very bedrock of their authority, offered no answers. "You wouldn't find me there," Elara said, her voice carrying a knowing weight. It was a simple statement, not boastful but utterly conclusive. "Convenient," Garrett muttered, his cynicism resurfacing, a defensive reflex. He was grasping at straws, desperate to discredit her. Just then, one of the medals, perhaps dislodged by his earlier rough handling, slipped from the uniform jacket and clattered loudly to the polished floor. Elara flinched visibly, the first clear sign of real distress she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. Her eyes, usually so composed, widened with a sudden profound alarm, fixed on the small, unassuming piece of metal. Before either officer could move, she took a swift, almost athletic step forward, her movements betraying a surprising agility for her age. She bent with a fluid grace, picked up the medal herself, and cradled it momentarily in her palm, her fingers tracing its intricate design with a tenderness that spoke of deep reverence. Then she held it out, her hand steady, offering it back to Garrett. "This was awarded after Nightingale," she said softly, her voice infused with a quiet solemnity. "3 of us received it. I am the only one still alive." The weight of those last words, delivered without self-pity or melodrama, silenced even Garrett temporarily. The cold, hard reality of loss, of lives sacrificed, hung in the air, undeniable and stark. He took the medal from her outstretched hand and, with surprising care, reattached it to the uniform, his fingers fumbling slightly, his earlier arrogance replaced by an awkward, almost clumsy reverence. "What was Nightingale?" Loretz asked, his official demeanor momentarily overcome by genuine curiosity. He was no longer just a security officer, he was a man confronted with a profound mystery. "It was the operation name in your notebook," Elara replied, her gaze meeting his, a fleeting hint of a shared secret in her eyes. "And that is all I am permitted to say, even now." Her words were delivered with the unwavering authority of a directive, a boundary clearly drawn even in her vulnerable position. The crowd had grown larger, words spreading through the building about the unfolding drama. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a public humiliation was transforming into something else entirely, a mystery unfolding in real time, a silent testament to a hidden history. Who was this elderly woman with the classified past? What operations had she been a part of that remained secret decades later? The air buzzed not with judgment, but with intense, shared curiosity. "We need to verify this," Loretz said, more to his colleague than to Elara, his voice low with concern. "If these are authentic military decorations, and if there is a legitimate reason they are not in the public record—" "She's making it up," Garrett interrupted, his voice now lacking conviction, a desperate hollow attempt to cling to his rapidly crumbling authority. "Old people do this sometimes, create fantasies about their past. It's common." His words, once sharp, now sounded like a child's petulant refusal to accept reality. "My past required no embellishment," Elara said quietly, her voice cutting through his feeble protest with an understated power, often quite the opposite. Her gaze, steady and profound, seemed to hold the weight of uncounted truths, of sacrifices too immense to be spoken lightly. A young woman in the crowd had been typing frantically on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "I just searched for Nightingale operation," she announced, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Nothing comes up except for a footnote in a declassified document about Cold War operations. It just says, see file D78, classified." All eyes turned to Elara, who showed no reaction to this information. She had known there would be no records. That had been the point. The tall military officer, General Harding, who had entered earlier, had completed his check-in process at another station, his expression previously unreadable, now held a focused intensity as he walked directly in their direction, his attention entirely on the scene unfolding at the security checkpoint. His uniform, adorned with rows of ribbons and medals and the stars on his shoulders, spoke to a long and distinguished career, an undeniable authority that seemed to radiate from him. He moved with a purpose that cut through the lingering chaos, his eyes fixed on the uniform in Garrett's hand. "I would like my uniform back now," Elara said firmly, her voice clear and resonant, a sudden surge of quiet command. "And my other belongings. I will be late for my appointment." "We cannot just take your word for this, ma'am," Garrett insisted, though his earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by a desperate confusion. Anyone can claim to have been part of a secret military operation. "I am not claiming anything," Elara repeated, her patience wearing thin, but her tone remaining steady. "I simply wish to proceed to my appointment with my belongings." "What exactly is this appointment?" Hayes pressed, his voice now tinged with a desperate need for information. "If you would just tell us that information is restricted," Elara replied automatically, the words a reflex honed by years of unwavering discipline, a protocol embedded deep within her. "Everything is restricted with you, is it not?" Garrett snapped, frustration replacing his earlier mockery, his voice rising again. "Convenient way to avoid answering questions." "Not convenient," Elara corrected him, her voice unwavering. "Necessary and in accordance with the oath I took." As she spoke, General Harding was now close enough that the details of his uniform were starkly visible, his towering presence casting a long shadow over the checkpoint. Garrett, seeing him approach, straightened unconsciously, a subconscious acknowledgement of higher authority, his own defiance instantly forgotten. "Sir, this area is—" he began, trying to assert some semblance of control over his domain, but his words were cut short. "Is that Captain Thorne's uniform you are holding, officer?" General Harding's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the tense silence of the checkpoint. It carried the unmistakable, unyielding tone of command, a sound that instantly silenced the entire atrium. Even those not directly involved in the confrontation, the weary travelers and curious onlookers, sensed the sudden, profound shift in power. The air, already thick with unspoken anxieties, now vibrated with the raw force of unquestionable authority, every head swiveled, every eye fixed on the towering figure who had just delivered a single devastating question. Officer Garrett looked from the uniform, still clutched in his trembling hands, to the approaching general, confusion and dawning horror evident on his face. His carefully constructed facade of authority crumbled instantly, replaced by a stammering, nervous response. We were just conducting a routine security check, sir," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to his earlier bluster, his shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, his stance losing all its previous aggression. General Harding stopped directly in front of them, his presence dominating the space. His gaze moved slowly, deliberately from the uniform to Elara, then back to the uniform. For a long, silent moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable, a blend of deep respect and something akin to a historical recognition. Time seemed to stand still, the only sound the faint distant drumming of the rain. The crowd held its breath, witnessing a silent, powerful acknowledgement unfold before them. Then, without warning, General Harding straightened his already impeccable back, his posture becoming even more ramrod straight, and raised his hand in a perfect, crisp military salute. "Captain Thorne," he said formally, his voice carrying the weight of decades of shared service, of respect earned on battlefields unseen by the world. "It has been many years." Elara returned the salute with practiced, unwavering precision, her movements betraying years of ingrained muscle memory, a discipline that went beyond conscious thought. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the automatic, flawless execution of a deeply honored gesture. "General Harding," she acknowledged, her voice soft but clear, her eyes meeting his with a profound understanding. 40 years, I believe." A murmur ran through the gathered onlookers, a collective gasp of surprise. The confirmation was undeniable, the rank undeniable, the history now undeniable. Garrett and Hayes exchanged panicked glances, their faces draining of all color, suddenly and terrifyingly aware they might have made a serious, irrecoverable error in judgment. The realization hit them like a physical blow. "You know this woman, sir?" Officer Loretz asked carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, laced with a desperate hope for a simple explanation, a way out of this nightmare. "Know her?" General Harding's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, a gesture of quiet incredulity. His voice, though still level, now carried an edge of steel. "Captain Elara Thorne was one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege of serving with, though I suspect that information has only recently become available to individuals with your clearance level." His words were a direct, pointed rebuke, aimed precisely at their ignorance and their abuse of authority. Garrett still held the uniform, now with considerably more care than before, his fingers almost reverently smoothing the fabric. "Sir, we had no way of knowing. Her file was classified," he stammered, attempting to justify their actions, to find a lifeline in the bureaucratic maze. "Her file was only declassified last month," General Harding continued, addressing the officers but looking directly at Elara, a subtle nod of respect passing between them. "After all these years, the operations her unit conducted can finally be acknowledged, which is why we are here today." His words clarified the mystery, but simultaneously amplified the officer's culpability. New climax too. Garrett, his face pale with humiliation, attempted one last desperate justification, a final futile attempt to cling to his shattered authority. "Sir, with all due respect, her file was restricted. We were only following protocol. How could we have known about a declassification that just happened?" he blurted out, a flicker of defiance still in his voice, attempting to shift blame onto the system. General Harding turned fully to him, his posture commanding his gaze like steel. "Officer," he stated, his voice low but cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "protocol includes dignity, and the integrity of classified information is paramount. You had a veteran before you, and you chose ridicule over respect. That, officer, is not protocol. It is a failure of judgment, one that is now abundantly clear." The public rebuke, delivered with devastating precision, left Garrett utterly defeated, his face draining of all color as the weight of his actions crashed down upon him. He visibly sagged, his shoulders slumping. General Harding turned to face the security officers fully, his posture commanding, and his voice level but absolutely authoritative. "I would appreciate it if you would return Captain Thorne's belongings to her with the same care and respect with which they were packed." Officer Garrett's face had drained of all color, a pasty white against the harsh fluorescent lights. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir," he stammered, his voice barely audible. He began carefully refolding the uniform jacket, his earlier mockery replaced with a clumsy, almost frantic reverence. His fingers fumbled with the materials, struggling with the simple task, his mind clearly reeling from the magnitude of his error. "We were just following protocol, sir," he muttered, a final weak attempt at self-justification. "Protocol includes dignity, officer," General Harding replied, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Something worth remembering." Officer Hayes had already begun gathering Elara's personal items, handling each with exaggerated care, a stark contrast to their previous rough treatment. The crowd watched in fascinated silence as the power dynamic shifted completely, a dramatic reversal of fortunes unfolding before their very eyes. Phones were still recording, capturing the transformation from humiliation to profound vindication. New exciting point 4, as Garrett awkwardly refolded the uniform, his hands trembling slightly. A small, intricate medal, overlooked in the chaos, slipped from its fastenings and clattered softly to the floor. General Harding, with surprising swiftness and grace, bent down, his veteran's instincts honed by years of attention to detail. His fingers, firm yet gentle, brushed over the cold metal with reverence. He carefully picked it up, his gaze holding a fleeting trace of sorrow, a silent contrast to the officer's earlier carelessness. Then, with meticulous precision, he gently placed it back onto the uniform, securing it with a quiet finality, an act of profound respect that resonated through the hushed checkpoint. Here is the combined Part 8 and 9 of the script, aiming for a minimum of 1,500 words, integrating the award ceremony and Elara's interactions at the reception. General Harding escorted Elara toward the elevators, their figures moving with a quiet authority that commanded deference. The crowd at the security checkpoint, still reeling from the dramatic revelation, parted respectfully to let them through. Rustin and Hayes stood rooted to the spot, in an uncomfortable silence, both processing the overwhelming magnitude of their error. "We really messed up," Hayes muttered, his voice barely a whisper, laced with genuine remorse. "How were we supposed to know?" Rustin replied defensively, though his voice lacked conviction, utterly devoid of its earlier arrogance. An older man in the crowd overheard them, his gaze following Elara and the general. "Maybe that's the point," he said, his voice soft but profound. "We never know who someone really is just by looking at them." The observation hung in the air, a silent truth echoing in the aftermath of the spectacle as General Harding and Elara disappeared into an elevator, ascending towards the ceremony where her decades of silent, extraordinary service would finally be acknowledged. The ceremony was held in a grand, sun-drenched hall on the top floor of the building. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, now sparkling clean, the rain having given way to clear, cerulean skies. The air, crisp and fresh after the storm, seemed to hum with anticipation. Rows of chairs, meticulously arranged, were filled with an array of military personnel in various dress uniforms, distinguished government officials, and the nervous, proud families of the honored veterans. The atmosphere, though formal, carried an undercurrent of profound solemnity and long-awaited recognition. At the very front of the room, a small, hallowed group of elderly individuals sat together. These were the surviving members of Covert Action Unit Phoenix, Elara's extraordinary, unsung unit. Elara took her place among them, her presence adding to the quiet aura of resilience that emanated from the group. She exchanged soft, knowing greetings with faces she had not seen in decades, some marked by time and hardship, others surprisingly well preserved, but all carrying the indelible stamp of shared, unimaginable experiences. Their reunion was subdued, devoid of loud fanfare but profound in its depth. The unspoken understanding, the shared burdens, and the unquantifiable sacrifices between them created a bond that transcended the long years of separation and enforced silence. Their eyes, though older, still held the sharp, intelligent glint of those who had seen too much, done too much, and kept it all to themselves. "Never thought we'd live to see this day," murmured Commander Silas Vance, a white-haired man seated next to Elara, his voice a gravelly whisper. His nameplate glinted softly. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of disbelief and quiet triumph. "Some of us didn't," Elara replied softly, her gaze sweeping over the empty chairs that represented their fallen comrades. Her voice carried the weight of profound remembrance. "But they are remembered," said another veteran, a woman named Eleanor Ellie Stone, her eyes moist but her chin held high. "Finally remembered." Officially, her words underscored the bittersweet nature of the moment. Recognition, yes, but for a history that had been buried for far too long, and for a cost so immense. A hush fell over the room, the collective anticipation becoming almost deafening as the president entered. He moved with a dignified solemnity, accompanied by high-ranking military officers, their uniforms ablaze with medals and ribbons. The ceremony began with impeccable formality and military precision, each step, each word carefully choreographed to honor those who had served in the deepest shadows. Each survivor of the Special Operations Unit was called forward individually, one by one, to receive their long-overdue recognition. Each walked to the podium with a quiet strength that belied their advanced years, their faces a tapestry of hidden stories. When Elara's name was called, Captain Elara Thorne, she walked to the podium with the same straight-backed, unyielding posture she had maintained throughout her ordeal at the checkpoint. Her steps were measured, confident, a testament to decades of discipline. The president spoke briefly about her service record, the parts that could now be disclosed, his voice resonating with gravitas. He pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to the uniform jacket she now wore, the medal glinting against the deep blue fabric, a beacon of light against a shadow past. Captain Thorne's actions during Operation Nightingale saved the lives of 37 hostages and prevented an international incident that could have escalated tensions during a particularly volatile period of the Cold War, the president announced, his voice carrying through the hushed hall. Her linguistic skills and quick thinking under extreme pressure exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Elara accepted the medal with a formal salute, her face betraying little emotion, a stoic mask honed by years of concealing the profound. But those who knew her well, her surviving comrades, could see the subtle shift in her expression, not pride for herself, but a profound, almost painful remembrance of those who had served alongside her and never returned, their sacrifices finally acknowledged in this hallowed hall. It was for them, she knew, for the truth they embodied. After the ceremony, a reception was held in an adjoining room. The atmosphere softened, transitioning from formal solemnity to a celebratory hum. Military personnel and government officials mingled with the honored veterans, their families, and a handful of select guests. Many sought out the veterans, eager to hear snippets of stories that had been classified for decades, to glimpse fragments of a history that had shaped their world from the shadows. Elara stood slightly apart, a glass of water in her hand, observing the proceedings with a quiet detachment. She acknowledged polite greetings with a small nod, her eyes taking in the scene without judgment. General Harding approached her, his smile warm and genuine. "How does it feel after all these years, Captain?" he asked, his voice soft, understanding. "Strange," Elara admitted, her gaze sweeping the bustling room. "To speak openly of things we were ordered never to mention. To be recognized for actions we were told never happened." "Times change, Captain," General Harding replied, his eyes reflecting a deep wisdom. "The world is ready for these truths now." "Is it?" Elara's question was genuine, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Or is it simply that those who wanted the secrets kept are no longer alive to protest?" Her words carried a profound weight, a challenge to the easy narrative of public readiness. Before General Harding could respond, they were interrupted by Officer Lena Brooks, the young security officer from the checkpoint. She approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable in the formal setting, her uniform looking slightly out of place amidst the decorated dress uniforms. "Captain Thorne," she said, nervously straightening her own jacket, "I hope I'm not intruding. I was invited to attend by General Harding." Elara nodded in acknowledgement, a faint, encouraging smile gracing her lips. "Officer Brooks, you are not intruding." Lena's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I wanted to apologize properly for what happened earlier," she began, her voice earnest, "for how you were treated." "You were not responsible," Elara replied gently, cutting her off before Lena could carry the full burden of the blame. "No, but I didn't speak up either." "I watched it happen," Lena admitted, her gaze dropping, filled with a raw honesty. "And I've been thinking about what you said about service happening when no one is watching." She looked up, her eyes seeking understanding. Elara studied the young woman for a moment, her gaze perceptive. "Why did you become a security officer, Officer Brooks?" The question seemed to surprise Lena. "To protect people," she answered, a flicker of idealism in her eyes. "To serve in some capacity." "And do you feel you are achieving that purpose?" Elara asked, her voice soft but probing. Lena hesitated, her gaze drifting to the mingling crowd. "Not always. Sometimes it feels like we forget why we are there. It becomes about authority rather than service." Elara nodded, a subtle approval in her expression. "A common hazard in any position of power, no matter how small. The uniform can become a shield for ego rather than a symbol of duty." "How did you handle it?" Lena asked suddenly, her voice dropping, leaning in slightly, as if seeking a profound secret. "The disrespect, I mean. Not just today, but throughout your career. It must have been so much worse back then, being a woman in that role, in those classified operations." "With dignity," Elara replied simply, the two words a summary of a lifetime's philosophy. "Not because I always felt dignified, but because maintaining dignity deprives others of the power to diminish you." She paused, considering her next words carefully, her gaze meeting Lena's with a profound intensity. "People will judge what they can see, Officer Brooks. Your job is to know what is invisible, your own worth, and the true value of the service you render, regardless of who is watching or whether they understand." Adira absorbed these words, clearly turning them over in her mind, a seed planted in fertile ground. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice filled with genuine gratitude for your service and for your wisdom. As Lena walked away, her steps more purposeful, General Harding turned to Elara. "You made quite an impression on her, Captain." "Perhaps," Elara acknowledged, a faint knowing smile on her lips, "though I suspect she already knew these things. Sometimes we simply need permission to believe what we already understand." The reception continued around them, the noise of conversation and clinking glasses creating a rich backdrop to their quiet exchange. Through the windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the medals and insignia that adorned the uniforms of those present, each one a silent story waiting to be told. The reception continued around them, a vibrant hum of conversation and clinking glasses, forming a rich backdrop to the quiet exchange between Elara and General Harding. Through the towering windows, the late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the grand room, highlighting the countless medals and insignia that adorned the uniforms of those present. Each glint of polished metal, each swatch of colorful ribbon was a silent story, a fragment of history now being celebrated in the light. Gradually, the celebratory energy began to wane, conversations winding down, and guests starting to make their farewells. The reception was drawing to a close. General Harding, his gaze thoughtful, turned back to Elara after a moment of shared silence, observing the room. "Will you tell them, Captain?" he asked, his voice low, almost contemplative. "The full story of Nightingale, now that it is declassified? The details of what truly happened?" He gestured subtly to the mingling crowd, the eager officials hoping for heroic tales, the reporters hoping for dramatic revelations, the younger military personnel seeking inspiration from legends. Elara looked out at the gathering, her eyes, deep and knowing, absorbed the expectation in their faces. She thought of the checkpoint earlier that day, of her most private things being displayed publicly, of secrets meticulously guarded for a lifetime suddenly being dragged into the harsh, unfeeling light. She remembered the dismissive sneers, the intrusive questions, the feeling of her dignity being challenged purely for sport. She considered the true cost of those operations, the silent burdens carried, the unspoken scars. "No," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, a quiet conviction in her tone that left no room for argument. "Some things belong to those who live them. Recognition is one thing, General. Exhibition is another." Her words carried the weight of a profound philosophy, a boundary drawn between what the public deserved to know and what remained sacred to the heart. It was a testament to the fact that true heroism often chose to remain in the shadows, its purest form unburdened by the clamor for fame. General Harding nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his eyes. He had known Elara for decades, recognized her unwavering character. "Always the most private of heroes, Captain Thorne," he remarked, a faint appreciative smile gracing his lips. "Not a hero," she corrected him gently, her gaze unwavering, "simply a soldier who did what was necessary, and what needed to be done." Her words were delivered not with false humility, but with the quiet clarity of one who understood the true, unromantic nature of duty. For her, heroism wasn't a grand title, it was the quiet, often brutal execution of a mission. As the reception truly began to wind down, Elara gathered her belongings. The worn duffel bag, which had been the catalyst for so much public scrutiny, now held her newly awarded Distinguished Service Cross alongside the meticulously preserved uniform that had revealed her true identity. The weight of the medal, though small, felt significant in her hand, a tangible symbol of a vindication long overdue. She made her way toward the exit, exchanging brief, knowing farewells with her former comrades, the handful of survivors from Covert Action Unit Phoenix. Their parting was quiet, full of unspoken history and shared understanding, a bond forged in fire and silence that no public ceremony could fully encapsulate. They were a band of brothers and sisters, their story etched not in public records, but in their very souls. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The streets, freshly washed, gleamed under the soft golden light of the late afternoon sun. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the invigorating scent of damp earth and renewed possibility. It was a world transformed, much like Elara's public identity had been transformed within the building. Just as Elara reached the building entrance, a figure stepped forward. It was Officer Lena Brooks, no longer in her security uniform but dressed in simple, thoughtful civilian clothes, a quiet recognition of the changed context. Her posture was still hesitant, a lingering awkwardness from their earlier encounter, but her eyes held a genuine earnestness. "Captain Thorne," she called, her voice barely above a whisper, approaching Elara. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I was wondering if I could walk with you for a bit. I have some questions about service, about finding meaning in it." Her gaze was sincere, a hopeful plea for guidance. Elara studied the young woman for a long moment. She saw the genuine seeking in Lena's eyes, the yearning for purpose beyond the rigid protocols and superficial judgments. She recognized a kindred spirit, a young soul grappling with the complexities of duty and dignity. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Elara's lips, softening the lines of age and experience. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Of course, Officer Brooks," Elara said, her voice gentle. "Though I am no longer an officer in that capacity, I am happy to walk with you." As they walked away from the grand government building together, their figures gradually shrinking in the vastness of the city, the older woman began to share. She did not recount the classified details of her daring missions, the names of targets, or the dates of covert operations. Those truths, as she had told General Harding, belonged to those who lived them. Instead, Elara shared the deeper, timeless truths about duty, not as blind obedience, but as a commitment to a higher purpose. She spoke of respect, not merely for rank or uniform, but for the inherent humanity in every individual, regardless of their station. And she spoke of the quiet courage required to stand tall in a world that often tries to diminish you, to strip away your worth through judgment, through prejudice, through indifference. She spoke of the inner fortress one must build, the unwavering conviction in one's own worth that no external force can shake. She talked about the burden of secrets, the weight of sacrifice, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you did what was necessary, even when no one else would ever know. Behind them, the government building stood gleaming in the late afternoon sun, its imposing facade now seeming less formidable, somehow infused with a new, quiet dignity by the events of the day. Its security checkpoint continued to buzz with activity, processing people, some important, some ordinary, some burdened by secrets, some seeking validation. But now, perhaps, a seed had been planted, a quiet reminder that every single one of them, regardless of their external presentation or official status, was deserving of the same basic dignity that Captain Elara Thorne had fought for, tirelessly and silently, throughout her remarkable, extraordinary life. Her legacy, previously hidden in classified files, would now subtly, quietly, begin to inspire. As Elara and Lena walked away, their figures growing smaller against the backdrop of the city, a profound silence settled over the government building. The day's events, which began with harsh scrutiny, had blossomed into an extraordinary revelation. It was a powerful testament to the hidden depths within every individual and the profound impact of quiet courage. This story, like so many others, reminds us that heroism isn't always found on grand stages or in history books. Sometimes it resides in the steadfast dignity of a single person, facing down prejudice with nothing but an unwavering spirit and a past that demands respect. It teaches us that judgment based on appearances can blind us to incredible truths, and that true service often happens far from the spotlight, driven by an inner compass that points towards duty and compassion, regardless of recognition. At Veteranbiker, we believe in bringing you these powerful narratives, stories that resonate with the human spirit, that challenge our perceptions, and that celebrate the unsung heroes among us. We strive to illuminate the often overlooked moments of grace, resilience, and profound human connection that shape our world. From the quiet strength of a veteran to the budding idealism of a young officer, every life holds a tale worth telling. We hope Captain Elara Thorne's journey, from public humiliation to a deeply personal vindication, has touched your heart as much as it has ours. Her words, "Respect is not earned by insignia, it is earned by recognizing humanity in others," serve as a timeless reminder for us all, encouraging a deeper empathy and understanding in our daily lives. What part of Elara's story resonated most with you? Did her quiet defiance inspire you, or did General Harding's recognition bring a tear to your eye? We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments section below. Your insights and perspectives enrich our community and help us understand the true impact of these narratives. Thank you for joining us on Veteranbiker. Your support, your likes, and your subscriptions mean the world to us and enable us to continue sharing more compelling stories of humanity's quiet triumphs. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel to join our growing community. We have many more powerful narratives waiting for you. And before you go, don't miss our other incredible videos appearing on your screen now. They're filled with more stories that will move, inspire, and challenge you. Until next time, keep seeking the heart in every tale.